Do not buy games for $80. Why should the consumer have to pay for studios going over budget? Do not buy games for $80. For most players, $80 is a big ask, and when there's an always growing backlog in many free-to-play games, do not buy games for $80. Publishers listen to sales numbers, not player voices, so do not buy games for $80. Unless you really want to, because you're your own person, so who am I to tell you what to do? But for me, I don't think I'm going to be buying any games, especially any base games, for $80 anytime soon. Of course, nobody likes to spend more money if they don't have to, but beyond that, the more I've thought about it and broken it down, the stronger I feel. Games today should not cost more than $70. Let's go through and break down each common argument used to justify why games should cost $80 and more with my accompanying counter-arguments. There are three main reasons I see listed on why video game pricing should go up to $80 as the new standard, with the most common reason being inflation. While gaming graphics have made exponential gains, the cost of everything has gone up significantly in the past 30 years, and so it can be argued that it's not necessarily an increase, but rather a correction. The standard price of video games in 1996 was $50, which when adjusted for inflation is just over $100 today. 10 years later, and in 2006, games increased to $60, which, accounting for inflation, is around $82. The most recent price increase was with the introduction of the PS5 in 2020 for $70, which already with inflation is around $87 in today's money. So on the surface, the claim that games would need to increase in price to stay in line with inflation today is true. However, in 2026, your typical consumer has less funds to spend on non-essential hobbies like gaming than in recent decades. I've heard many cite a lack of wage growth in relation to inflation, which is only somewhat true. In the past 30 years, inflation and median household income have gone back and forth, with income actually somewhat outpacing inflation at around 140% increase versus 110%. But the big difference is housing. The median monthly mortgage payment has more than doubled and even almost tripled, with around 173% increase since 1996. Put simply, today things cost more money, and although people make more money, most consumers' largest expense of housing now takes an even larger portion of their total income, leaving less left over than ever for things like video games. Around 2006, with the standard price increased to $60 and housing being relatively expensive, was the closest I could get to today with comparably similar disposable income levels. So the only time in the past 30 years when adjusted for inflation, wage growth, and housing where gamers had a similarly low amount of disposable income was shortly before the financial crisis. So take with that what you will. As funds continue to get tighter, I don't believe the fact that prices just went up not even a full console generation ago will sit well for many gamers who feel only marginal improvements in the latest games compared to the perceived leaps and bounds of 2006. The second reason I often see used as a justification to increase modern game prices is tiered pricing. I've heard some talk about certain games like GTA 6 exceeding $80, being as high as $100 or even $110. In theory, this would serve as the new top end for current pricing structures, while many smaller games may be $40, $60, or $80 depending on the budget, scale, and demand. Essentially, let the market decide on how much a game is worth. Well, this is already more or less what we do with our current climate. Not every new game today is released at $70. In fact, there were multiple Game of the Year nominees from last year, including Clair Obscur Expedition 33, Hollow Knight Silksong, and Hades 2 that were all $50 or less. To be fair, I think the idea, when fully realized, would have more games evenly distributed across the full range of pricing options instead of being mostly concentrated towards the top end. But that then invites an even greater emphasis on the always present conversation of value. A large part of how a game is priced is that perception of value. Price a game too high and it gets picked apart for every shortcoming and nitpick. Price it too low and consumers will often assume a lack of quality and overlook it. That's why the psychology of something being on sale is as powerful as it is. Scale is a real factor here too. A game like Astro Bot doesn't cost nearly as much to make as, say, Marvel's Spider-Man 2, and so they can get away with having a lower MSRP, but the biggest factor is always going to be the total units sold. Grand Theft Auto 6 may be the most expensive game ever created, with an estimated budget being likely over $1 billion with a B, compared to Spider-Man 2's already massively bloated reported budget of around $300 million. As many of us already know, if both games were to be sold at the same price, GTA 6 would take in a much larger profit because of the total units sold. Despite the titanic budget, GTA 6 does not need to cost more than $70 to make a profit because it's going to sell an ungodly amount of copies. However, how much more money could they make if it was $10, $20, $40 more per unit? How would this affect the total units sold and their even bigger cash cow of GTA Online? I'm not going to pretend to know the answers, but regardless of the potential extra cash Take-Two could rake in, it wouldn't translate to helping other titles by increasing the top end of current pricing to over $80 for a base game. Which brings me to the final point of budget. The heart of most video game budgets can be boiled down to how many people worked on a game, times their respective salaries, times the amount of time spent working on the title. Other big portions of a budget could include marketing, licensing costs, and even at-work perks, but time, size, and pay are at the core. As we've already mentioned, the cost of living has skyrocketed, and so worker pay has needed to go up accordingly. Games are more complicated and bigger than ever, so studios require larger teams for greater periods of time. I couldn't find any directly comparable numbers, but and I'm sure you can think of many examples of AAA games from a couple console generations ago that only had teams in the double digits that were able to get a game out within 2 to 3 years. Fast forward to today, and many of the biggest games have triple or even quadruple digit team sizes, while 5 years is considered a reasonable turnaround time between titles. With all these factors, many games cost over $100 million to produce, with countless projects going well over budget. So it's an easy argument to make that game prices should go up to reflect higher production cost. However, I have 3 points to consider. Games today sell way more copies on average than they used to, and so higher budgets can be justified because investors believe in bigger returns. The extra profit that would come from a potential price increase to a game wouldn't necessarily go directly to the employees who made the game, but in fact, time has shown us in most cases the majority of the funds would be funneled to the suits at the top. And lastly, the most important point, what is the point of a budget if you fail to meet it? Games are very complicated and hard to make, so it's not hard to imagine a scenario where a development team goes well over budget. But how is that the problem of the consumer? If a team knows their budget is, for example, $60 million, and they go over $20 million, that shows they mismanaged their time and resources. Again, easier said than done, but at the end of the day, if standard game prices rose, there is no reason to suggest that that would stop certain studios from going over budget because they failed to stay in budget due to mismanagement of time and scope in the first place. It's almost irrelevant what the standard MSRP for the new game would be if a publisher and studio can't set an appropriate scope for that appropriate product. To summarize, I don't think the consumer should be convinced to pay more for budget mismanagement in a time where most consumers have less money than ever to spend on something as non-essential as gaming. I don't believe it would be the end of the world if games did raise in price, but I think for the health of the industry, it would be in everyone's best interest to keep prices as they are for now. At this point, we haven't seen many games attempt a long-term increase, but we all know publishers will if they think they can. I believe now is the most crucial time to make a stance if you don't want to see prices go up. I'd love to hear your thoughts on any of the points discussed, and if you agree, also make sure you leave a like. As always, I appreciate you for watching, and until next time, see ya.